It's good to be with you. I had the chance to share again. If my voice is a little bit croaky or sore this morning, please forgive me. It's due to the Sydney Sixers game in Sydney last night. And great result. Steve Smith was playing after being in the test team and managed to get 121 not out, batted through the whole innings. But the highlight was that it was Cindy's first game of cricket. So Cindy and Hugh were down there as well. Sorry? Watching, not playing. So good fun. Summertime is a great time, isn't it? So our key verse for this mini-series in summer about travelling light and getting rid of the baggage and taking things over to St Luke's Hall is from Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1, a great verse. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. And when I read that verse, a real-life example comes to mind. Our son, when he was in year 9 at school, signed up for the Duke of Edinburgh program, which is a great program for young people. And part of that program involves hiking, overnight hikes. And so some friends from his school and some friends from another school and some trainers were getting together to plan and prepare for their first hike to see what that was like. And Sam got the list of things and diligently got everything together. Either we had it at home or he borrowed it. Got himself packed and organised, and Jane and I drove him to the drop-off point where his friends were there, those from the other school, the trainers. And they had their packs open, just double-checking they had what they needed and repacking and making sure things were fine. And one of Sam's friends was a big, strong guy. And even in year 9, he was stronger and taller than the others. And he had a lot of gear. But as he was checking and repacking and sorting things out, some other friends would say to him, I don't have room in my pack for such and such. Can you carry it? Now, a big, strong year 9 person can't say no to something that involves his strength. And he said, yeah, sure, look, I can take that. And within a few minutes, he had a bit of this from someone and this person's other thing and so forth. And his pack was huge. Anyhow, they got all sorted and loaded up their packs and off they went. Now, Jane and I came back the next afternoon for pickup, expecting that we would chat for a little bit to the students and to the trainers and find out what had happened. And we saw the boys, and they were blackened and bedraggled. Part of the walk had been through some bushland that had a bushfire go through a few months beforehand, so they had charcoal and ash all over them. And we went to Sam to start to talk about what this was like. His response was, get in the car. Righto. Jane and I actually still use that phrase from time to time when there's a situation where there's no time for small talk and we just have to have action. This is a get in the car moment. So we got in the car and sort of didn't say much, and I thought, well, that'll be the end of hiking for Sam. Obviously, it was pretty rough going. To his credit, he's hiked hundreds or thousands of kilometres since then. But as the story unfolded, he told us what had happened, and this big, strong guy hadn't been walking more than 15 minutes, half an hour at the most, and he started to complain. The pack was too heavy. He was moaning and groaning and slowing the team down, and it was just miserable to be with him. And when they got to the spot where they were camping, Sam found out that he was to share a tent with this guy. And Sam very carefully arranged his side of the tent, and what he couldn't fit in the tent, he put in his pack, did the pack up, put a tarpaulin over it, put it outside so nothing would get to it. This guy had stuff sprawled everywhere, all around the campsite, all through the tent and so forth. Anyhow, during the evening, when they were asleep, this big rain squall came through. And Sam said they could hear the wind coming, and then the rain hit. And this guy woke up realising his stuff was spread all around outside the tent. And in the dark, he's trying to find the zipper for the tent and find a torch, and then out into the rain, and he's treading on his gear and tripping over his gear, tripping over the tent rope, almost bringing the tent down, cursing and swearing and so forth. And Sam said it was just, at the time, wasn't very fun, but now when he thinks back, he thinks it was quite amusing. But what an example of weight that slows you down and sin that trips us up. Just carrying too much stuff. And so this series is about that. What is it that we can strip away? And last week, Steve spoke to us about stripping away control, letting go of control. This week, we're talking about distractions. Things that can distract us from running the race that God has set before us. Jesus talks a lot about distractions in the Bible. And one of those is the verse when he's talking about the parable of the sower. And he says, the seed that fell among thorns stands for those who hear, but as they go on their way, they are choked by life's worries, riches and pleasures, and they do not mature. Things in our lives that distract us from maturing in our Christian faith. And whether we've been Christians for a long time or a short time, or still exploring and asking what is it all about, there's steps we can go down towards maturity. Jesus mentions in Luke chapter 12, he talks about developing a rich relationship with God. In Luke chapter 10, the story of Mary and Martha, Jesus is visiting their home. And Martha's racing around serving Jesus and doing all the things that needed to be done, and is accusational of her sister Mary, who's just sitting listening to Jesus. And Jesus said, Mary has chosen what's most important. And there are so many things in our lives that can distract us from growing and maturing in God. But consider this, a distraction is only a distraction when it takes focus from something more important. So there's a lot of things in our lives that are good things, that are right things, that are proper things, that have their purpose, but they can become distractions. An example, I like to ride, and when I go riding, I have a water bottle, sits in a holder just below the seat so I can easily get it and have a drink and keep on riding. It's good to drink water when you're exercising, keep hydrated, etc., etc. And there are times where I can very easily reach down and grab that water bottle. There's a road that I go on that's wide and it's open, and there's hardly any cars on it, and it's easy just to grab the water bottle and have a drink and put the water bottle back in the holder again. Sometimes at a traffic light where I'm waiting for it to turn, I'll quickly grab a drink and away I go again. But sometimes my ride takes me down Jesmond Hill, from the top of that hill down towards where they're doing the construction. And at the top of the hill, the lanes are wide, there's plenty of space for a cyclist, but the further down you get, the lanes narrow, that lane on the left disappears, and you're funneled now through the construction area. There is no way I'm going to take my hand off the handlebars and have a drink of water while I'm going down that hill. That could be a distraction that could have very serious consequences. And so we have to make choices about the things in our lives that can be good, but are they distracting us at the wrong time from what we really need to focus on, our maturity and growth in God? So as I was preparing this morning, I came across, I thought of 5 key areas where we can be distracted, where things can pull us away from focusing on God. And there could be 6, there could be 7, there could be 109. There's many things that could do that. But these are some key ones that we'll look at this morning. Now, if you're someone who likes to take notes or look at the screen, take photos, I've actually got printout of this. And so at the end of church today, I'll get you a printout that has all that's on the next series of slides. So you don't have to be distracted while you're watching this. So the first thing that can distract us is what I look at. And Jesus says, your eye is like a lamp that provides light for your body. But when your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. When your eye is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. And if the light you think you have is actually darkness, how deep that darkness is. So what we look at can impact our spiritual health. And we can be deceived to thinking that what we're looking at is good and it's right, but maybe it's not. And here's some areas that come to mind. One is looking at other people, following their example. Paul writes in Ephesians 5, follow the example of Christ. Follow his example. But we can look at other people instead of looking at God and look at their successes and get envious, or look at their failures and get judgmental. Look at their possessions and think they should be going to the garage sale on the weekend. But it can draw us away from time with God by being jealous and envious. Social media and screens is an obvious one. We spend so much time on social media, and that can be a distraction. Not just in terms of time, but of course in terms of what we're looking at. And there's some very unhealthy things on social media, and that can draw our attention away from God as well. And I wonder, do you spend as much time in the Bible as you do on Facebook? Or as much time in prayer as you do, watching the latest Netflix series or whatever it might be? I mean, Facebook and Netflix have their place in our lives, but they can be a significant distraction. And I wanted to talk about possessions. Of course, Pam's mentioned that already, and we'll actually hear a message in a few weeks' time specifically about that. But looking at those and all the things that we have and all the clutter in our life certainly can distract us away from maturing in our faith. The second thing, what I look at, what I listen to. And Paul writes in Romans that faith comes from hearing, that is, hearing the good news about Christ. And are we listening to things that encourage us in our Christian life, that encourage us to grow deeper in our faith, to mature, to draw closer to God? Or are we listening to things that would distract us from that? Negative voices, either our own internal negative voices or external voices, they can undermine confidence in God's love and his purpose, causing us to drift from faith. I came across an example of negative voices recently. I was reading a book about a man who, at the age of 12, was told by his parents, loving family, that he was actually adopted. He and his brother were adopted from separate families. And that didn't spoil the relationship and the family life that he had. But in his young adult years, he had this desire to find out about his birth parents. And he knew that it was a Catholic Church agency that had enabled the adoption to happen. So he contacted them, and that was the start of a 30-year journey of frustration, of closed doors, of secrecy, and so hard for him to find the truth, eventually finding that Mum was a nun and Dad was a priest some 30 years older than Mum. But he has a real negative attitude towards the church, the institution of the church, and therefore to God. But in that book, he quotes Clive James, and when I read this quote, I was quite angry. Clive James is a journalist, Australian-born, but spent most of his life in the UK. Also on TV, hosted a TV show, passed away a couple of years ago. But he says, religion is an advertising campaign for a product that doesn't exist. And I could understand why in this book about this man who's trying to find his heritage and his birth parents, why he had that negative attitude towards the church. But Clive James is quite an influential person. And there are people out there who will make quotes and make statements and influence people in a really negative way, sceptical of the Christian faith or antagonistic towards it. And if we're listening to those kind of voices, they can distract us from the truth of God's word. Entertainment, what is it that we listen to with podcasts or music? Things that can very easily normalise poor language, bad attitudes, attitudes against Christianity as well. And things that we listen to too frequently or too often, we can overlook that. What might shock us at first doesn't have that same impact over time. And that can be a significant distraction to us. And of course, the conversations that we have. Are they conversations of gossip and complaint? Do we talk with someone and find that conversation is fostering the negativity or division, not encouraging us, not building up our hope, not lifting up, but rather dragging us down? Third area is what we talk about. Paul writes, don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. Now, we might look at that verse and think, well, use foul or abusive language. I don't do that. Tick. Let's go on with the next thing. But look at the next thing. It's not just about foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good. Let everything you say be good. Helpful so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. When you speak, are you lifting people up? Are you encouraging them in their faith? Do we talk about ourselves being overly focused on ourselves in conversations? And doing that prevents real connection and communication and ministry opportunities. And I guess we all know people who, when we talk with them, it's not like a conversation, but rather we're being talked at. And all we hear is about their life story and what they're doing and what this is and what that is and so forth. We've got to be careful we're not those people, that we're interested in drawing people into conversation and finding ways to speak life into that conversation. Do we talk about others in a negative way? And we do share things about other people and their lives and tell stories of those we've interacted with. That's part of life. But are we making sure that when we do that, we say things that we wouldn't be afraid to say to the person face to face? We're not bagging them out and pulling them down. A negative speech. Do we speak words of fear or criticism, or words that diminish faith and spread discouragement? These things are so important. What we talk about can be a distraction to our faith. What I do, Paul writes in Colossians, whatever you do or say, do it as a representative of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks through him to God the Father. What do we do? Is it a distraction to our faith or not? Overcommitment can be something that we do, just filling our schedule with things, and they can be good things. But perhaps you've heard the expression of working so hard for the Lord, we don't have time to be with the Lord. And what we do, how we're committed, can be a distraction. We're just too busy to really have time with God. Or conversely, there might be things that we know we should be doing, but we don't. And God is calling us to something or prompting us to do something, and we don't do the things that really need to be done to facilitate our spiritual growth and maturity. Or perhaps we do things that are unhelpful. We have behaviours and habits that consume time or are unhealthy and really do nothing to promote our spiritual growth. And the final of these is who I am with. Who are you with? In Proverbs we read, walk with the wise and become wise. Associate with fools and get into trouble. And who we are with can be a distraction from our spiritual growth. They can be relationships that we might call are toxic. They're really unhealthy for us, that pull us away from God, or even encourage us to do the wrong thing. We need to consider the relationships that we have there. Or those who are with, but they're just wrong influences. Their attitudes, the values that they have are not godly ones. The priorities that they have are worldly priorities, not encouraging us to really grow in God and make him our priority. And this one, neglecting to meet with other believers. The Bible talks about that. It says, do not fail to meet with the believers. And we know not just at this church, but in many churches since COVID, there's people we just don't see in church anymore. And while churches a lot went online during COVID, and that was what had to happen, people have come used to that lifestyle of maybe occasionally flicking on and watching something online, but not actually meeting together. And it's so essential that we meet together. This is where we share life. We share the challenges, the heartbreak of this young family who lost their dad through the week. And we can nurture and pray. Or just the joys and sorrows, the things that we're doing. encouraging each other, getting to know one another. It's so important to continue to meet together. So you'll find all of those points on the sheet that I'll hand out shortly. And also there's a column for a bit of a checklist. And if you want to, as you are reflecting on this over the week, you might want to tick the things that God is really speaking to you. These are distractions that are preventing your maturity, or they're burdens that you're carrying that you don't need to carry. But you'll also notice on the sheet there's a sixth one that just says other, because you might find that there are things that are distractions to you that God is really speaking to you about, and you need to work through. But before you do any of that, consider this. If you don't have a point of focus, you don't have distractions. Riding down Jesmond Hill on my bike, if my focus isn't on getting home alive, then there's no distractions. I can take a drink bottle. I can see how I go, no hands down that hill. Or can I zip in and out of the traffic? But I have a point of focus, and that is to live. But if we don't have a point of focus in a lot of areas of our lives, then there's nothing to distract us, because there's nothing we're aiming for. And so as believers, our point of focus must be about maturing in our faith. It must be about, as Steve was talking last week, about drawing close to God, about developing a rich relationship with God. And so before we even look at the sheet of all those possible distractions, we've got to think, well, is this really my focus? Beachy was talking to us about setting goals for 2025. And we need to know what it is. What do we want in our spiritual faith? To deepen our relationship with God, or just to explore what the spiritual faith is all about. If we don't have that point of focus, then there are no distractions. And if we look through that list that you'll have shortly and think, no. My question is, what's your focus? What is it that you are aiming for? I want to conclude with one final story. During the Christmas holidays, we were with a friend, and she had a meal with us. And after the meal, I was in the kitchen just tidying up and cleaning things. And she came in to help, and we just got chatting. And I know that her life now is tough. I know her family situation is very difficult. I know that she's an incredibly strong Christian person. And as we were talking, just doing the dishes, she started telling me about her childhood, and I didn't realise how difficult that was. Dad was out of the picture. There was her and a brother, and Mum, who was a strong Christian and would make sure that they got to church and Sunday school and those sort of things. But Mum suffered significantly from mental illness, and at times was incredibly abusive towards the children, particularly to her. And to the point where she was actually removed from her family and in foster homes, and ended up in a children's home for some time because there were no foster families to take her. And that was her childhood experience. And she'd try and go back with Mum, and it wouldn't work out again. And so I said to her, what was it like when you were put into a foster home, a children's home? And she said, it was a relief. Terribly missed the concept of having a loving family, but didn't have that, and she just needed to get away. And she was talking about a brother, and I said, is he still in church? Does he still have faith? And she said, no. And I said, what's the difference? What's the difference? You've both been through a terrible childhood. You particularly, he was more the golden child, though things were still rough for him. What's the difference? And she thought for a moment, and she said, the difference was who we looked at. The difference was who we looked at. She said, all through that difficult time in my childhood, I looked at Jesus. That was my source of strength, my comfort, my peace, a source of feeling loved and valued when everything else in the world was against that. My brother looked at Mum, and he said, if that's what a Christian person is like, I want nothing of that. I want nothing of that. And he felt for his sister, who was copping the majority of the abuse, and thought, she's been treated so badly by her mum, who's a Christian. I want nothing of that. And to me, that really stood out. It's a very simple statement, but how true is that? We have to focus on Jesus. That key verse that we read about stripping off the weight and especially sin that trips us up and run with endurance is followed by this verse. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus. Keeping our eyes on Jesus. That's how we get rid of the distractions in our lives. The champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Now that's a process. And that takes time. And that takes endurance as we go through the rough times. But in that verse, it also mentions how Jesus had to endure something as well. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Now he is seated in the place of honour besides God's throne. So I want to encourage you this morning to really keep your eyes on Jesus. There's a world full of distractions, and we have to endure and go through and work hard sometimes, but there's a joy waiting for us. I'm going to get my happy helpers to hand out the sheets now. Thanks, Jack and Ree. And I'll get the band to come up and just give you some time to begin to look through that. And as you do, ask God, what is it that may be a burden of distraction for you? And if your goal is to develop a rich relationship with Jesus, to mature in your faith, to draw close to God, what is it that is preventing that from happening? Now, you don't need to tick a box or respond or write anything in the other right here and now, but I want to encourage you to begin to think it through and then take time at home over the week and say, God, what is it that is in my life that is that distraction? What is it that would prevent me from drawing close to you? So take some time, begin to think through that now, just as we quietly hear Pam playing.